With the current funding model that we have in place now, is there a future for aged care in the next 5 years?
Categorically no. We have to get people that can afford to pay towards their care, to make a contribution towards their care.
Robert, thank you for joining us today. It seems like many years ago, I was working as a facility manager for an ASX listed company, and you were helping families with their funding options. You're a very well-respected figure in the industry. I know for the last 40 years, you've been working in the capacity of a financial advisor, but the last decade, you've been helping families navigate that very difficult, tricky entry into aged care with all the million acronyms that we do have. So for those of our viewers who don't know who you are, if you could please give yourself an intro and just talk about what you do.
Well, I've been a financial planner for 50 years now, but for the last 15 done nothing but residential aged care, retirement villages, land lease communities, DVA and Centrelink, particularly working with DVA and Centrelink. More these days assisting providers rather than individual families, but still work in that area and get lots of queries, and like to think I sort of know a little bit of what I'm talking about. So I run training sessions for providers, and I did one the other day for a group of independent living residents, 50 odd residents, that came to hear how the system works, what happens if they need some care to stay at home, what happens if one member stays in the unit and one member moves to care, and so on. It is horrendously complex. It's like a bowl of spaghetti. If you move one parameter, it might impact their pension. Their pension is taken into account in assessing their means-tested care fees. So yes, it is complex, and in this demographic that we work, they're elderly people, so sometimes their brains aren't quite as quick with picking things up as they were when they first left school. So, and it's an emotional time. It's an extremely emotional time. If you have to put a spouse or a parent into residential care, quite often, the tears are flowing. There's a lump in the throat. They didn't want to do it. I have a famous saying, particularly for daughters that have been looking after mum, promise mum I'd never do this. And I say, really, the indignity of changing mum's nappy, showering, and so, why don't you let the professionals do that? They get a break. They get 3 shifts, and they're trained. You come and do some nice stuff. Put a lippy on, do a hair, take her to dinner, have some quality time with mum. So a lot of the financial advice that you give is intermingled with the emotional side, making people feel less guilty for what they're doing.
No, Robert, you're right. I mean, in terms of what you're doing, and I think it's important that people understand and realise that people's lives are getting busier. As a nation, as humanity, we are getting busy in terms of what we're doing. And coming from the UK, where I looked after and managed nursing homes, I was actually born in a nursing home, so I was always destined for aged care, and that was knitted in my DNA. It's important to note that families weren't able to be there all the time, and Mother's Day, Father's Day, Easter and Christmas. But in terms of families having that quality time with our vulnerable aging population, it's important. But you've picked up a good point there. I think, and not removing that intelligence in terms of your financial understanding and your insights. I think many times you wear different caps as a counsellor, being there to support families through this really difficult process, because it's that guilt of putting someone into a home, and as beautiful as it looks, that institutionalized aspect and mentality remains, and there's that guilt sort of in place. So I think, I'm sure you've worn a few different caps in your career.
Very much so. Anybody that wants to give advice in the aged care space, if they haven't got empathy, if they haven't got counselling, if they haven't got a heart, get out. You shouldn't be there. You're very much part of. And it's the carers, it's exactly the same. If you get an RN that is focused on procedure and fantastic in operating theatre, exactly what a surgeon wants, but quite possibly not the person that should be in residential care. My experience is that 95% of the carers that work in aged care should be canonised while they're on earth. They would have to be, from my perspective, the kindest, most caring, compassionate group of people that I've ever had the privilege of working with.
I think you're right. It goes beyond the job. It's the job satisfaction of making a difference. It goes beyond, the team building, the barbecues, or the gift voucher that you get at the end of the year. It's about genuinely making a difference in someone's life, and that's why I believe our workforce, they turn up each and every day, for work. But I think I just wanted to touch on the subject here in terms of your experience. Now, we've talked about people getting their ACATs done, getting an approved home care package prior to entering into aged care. But what are your thoughts on that gap? And what I mean by that is that gap of somebody who has had an assessment but is waiting for their approval of a home care package level 1 to 4 with supplements, and what happens there in terms of that 18-month to 2-year process? I know it's improved now, but what happens to those almost lost generation of people who are waiting, desperately needing care, and their loved ones can't provide that care to them?
Well, my advice to people, and for people that have got nothing, it's a massive problem. But for people that have got some equity in their home, that have some money in the bank, I always say, if mum needs care, go and get it now. Go and talk to a provider. By all means, go to my aged care, get in the queue, get an ACAT, get a RAS officer to come and talk. But if mum needs care today, get care today. And when the package or the plan becomes approved, that will subsidise the care that mums needs. But to wait for the package, I've got, they're now down to under 12 months, with the new,
Much better.
the new batch of packages that became available at the last budget. But it can be up to 3 months getting an ACAT assessment after you ring My Aged Care, and then another 9 or 12 months after that. So there's a long wait, and people that leave it till the last minute, invariably a fall and broken hip, and you're straight to resi care. The package doesn't come into effect before the care needs are so high that you need to move to care. So if you need help, get on the phone and get some.
You're so right, Robert. I think in terms of families seeking the support when they need it, at that immediate need, not as an afterthought, because as we know, very often, common scenario, the loved one has a fall at home, goes to hospital, and ends up in residential aged care, not the pathway they wanted, and very most commonly than not the home they wanted. But in terms of, wanted to get your advice on what are your thoughts in terms of, as you know, the home that I managed many years ago was a home that had very high net worth individuals, and often families would want a sleep-in carer, someone to be there during the day to provide that emotional support, that oversight. So what's your advice to families who want that sort of oversight and additional support for their loved ones?
My wife has a cousin at the moment that is in care, that the carer goes in every day. It was the carer that was looking after him at home, serious dementia. I often see carers in residential facilities sitting with people during the day, helping them with meals. So if you are relying totally on the carers in the facility to provide the care for your mother, they are stretched to the limit. Every facility in Australia is understaffed simply because to be staffed to the level that the facility manager would like, they would be totally bankrupt. You just can't do it. So that the carers will give as much attention as they possibly can to each individual, but if they need more, and quite often I say to the kids, it's mum and dad's money. If you need to take a little bit of equity out of the home, if the home hasn't been sold, we can still introduce you to a broker that will organise some equity be taken out of that home to provide the care the parents need.
You've just made a really pivotal point, and that's in terms of fee for service. And with the current, I guess, layers in aged care, having the right registered nurses, care managers, facility managers, hospitality managers, there's a lot of costs. And in terms of financial viability for providers, the question that I wanted to ask you now, Robert, is with the current funding model that we have in place now, is there a future for aged care in the next 5 years? Or are we going to continue to see smaller providers shutting up shop, selling, acquisitions from the bigger players?
First question, no, it's not sustainable. Second question, yes, we will see them shutting up and walking away. The current model, and talking to a senior accountant the other day, and he said the few facilities that are making a profit, 95% of them are making a profit because they're not allowing for depreciation. So he said that if you're not depreciating your asset in 15 years' time, it's going to be, I don't know how nice it is now, it's going to be a rundown, derelict type facility. So what do you do with it then? Do you close it? Do you turn it into a block of units? So yeah, we've got to increase the level of funding, and we cannot rely on the government to do it. Yes, they need to address, but people that can afford to contribute more to their care. At the moment, any contribution from the individual reduces the government contribution. So the ANACC is reduced by the means tested care fee. But if additional money to that, such as the basic daily care fee, for people that can afford it and would like higher level of care, more nursing staff, more carers, higher quality food, all the things that we now call additional or extra services. It's a fight. I'm helping facilities at the moment put in additional services, and we've got to cost it, and it's got to go in the agreement. The whole thing is a huge pushback from the bureaucracy, saying we don't want you to do it. And I'm saying, well, why not? If people are prepared to pay it and they want the additional services, you should be welcoming the provider that is charging the additional services, and then ramping up the care, ramping up the quality of entertainment, the quality of food, all the things that can be done with more money. And the facility managers are screaming out for help. They're being pushed by head office to reduce costs because it's unprofitable, and we've got a population, an older population, certainly for people that need the level of the blanket care. So somebody that's got nothing, 99% of Australians will support that person being funded 100%. Yes, they've got to put in their pension, but it's still coming from the taxpayer. So all for correct funding for people that need support, that haven't got the means. But somebody that's sitting on a $10 million house in Vaucluse, scraping away on the pension because they've got nothing in the bank, the house is exempt from the pension, and they can go in as a fully supported resident where the government is paying $200 and $220 a day towards their ANACC, the subsidy that's going to the facility. It is absolutely crazy. The funding model for people with no means, I'm sort of kind of, I think it's very complex, but it's sort of kind of fit for purpose. But what the government have done is outsourced their responsibility to look after the older population. They've given it to the church and charities largely, but now some for-profit providers as well. They control the funding and they control basically everything that has to be done. And I'm saying there's no position for market forces, well, a little bit for additional services. But to get extra services, it has to be approved by the pricing commissioner, and then you can't take low means residents, all the rules and regulations. I'm thinking, why don't you make it a business? If Joe Blow, the provider, wants to put a $2 million RAD in a low socioeconomic area, he's going to go broke. The market won't cop that.
Correct, that's right.
But somebody that's got $1 million house in Western Sydney is reasonably comfortable. And at the moment, the whole thing seems to be about protecting the equity in that home for the children, rather than looking after mum and dad. I often say to families sitting around, mum and dad have got a house worth in Sydney, typically, it's $900,000 or something. They've got $50,000 in the bank, so they've got roughly $1 million in assets. If we put them into a higher RAD room with an additional services and work it all out, they're going to be $12,000 or $15,000 a year cash flow negative, which we can take out of the house or we can take out of the RAD, whatever. And I said, Mum at this stage of her life is here for a good time, not for a long time. So if we reduce that 1.2 million or 1.1 million down to 1.05 million, and you divide it by U3, and you've given Mum a Rolls Royce ride, explained like that, 90% of my clients used to say, oh, it's irrelevant. Yeah, we want to look after Mum and Dad. But if you say straight out to them, you could lose the house and get nothing. Oh, well, I don't want to be in that. But the little bit that would be taken out of the typically wealthy, and I say wealthy, $1 million over in assets, the little bit that would need to be taken out of there to give their parents the best of the best for the last couple of years of their life is almost irrelevant and properly sold, properly explained.
I agree, Robert. I think, and again, going back to with the counsellor's cap on, actually effectively explaining that unfortunately the average stay for a resident in Iraq is 2 years, with the most common cause of discharge being fatality. So, from a loved one's perspective, you want to optimise their quality of life during those 2 years. You want to give them the best experience in their final stages of life, to respect the life that they've lived. Couldn't agree more.
I couldn't agree more. And an extra $20 a day, if the facility manager could hire a chef or organise for somebody to improve tenfold the quality of food, the taste of the food, and it is not an overly expensive thing. But at the moment, they've got a pair of handcuffs on. They can't. They're going out the door backwards. So something needs to change, and it needs to change very, very quickly. And I understand the government is doing a review. ANACC Wells started a review, and I'm sure that's continuing. And hopefully,
much needed review.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully it will come up with a solution where they will allow facilities some flexibility in charging people that can afford it an additional amount to give them an improved quality of life. Somebody with a billionaire,
Correct.
the nurse that is looking after them, and the AIN looking after them is paying tax, PAYG. So some of their taxes are going to pay for, 4 months. As means not disclosed, you'll reach your annual cap in about 4 months, same in the second year, and 2 months into the third year, you will reach your lifetime cap. So here's a man sitting, or a woman sitting on $100 million in the bank, and the kid that is, kid to me, probably inappropriate, but I'm old enough to call them kid. But the young carer, that is paying PAYG tax, part of that tax is going to keep that billionaire being paid his ANACC, and it's just it is ludicrous. And the same with a house. You know, a $10 million house valued at, what is it now, $193,000. It's capped at 100 indefinitely for the aged care. After 2 years, it counts as an investment property if they keep it over 2 years, so they'll lose their age pension. But for aged care, the home, while ever it is retained, is capped from the asset at 193,000. It just doesn't make sense. So there are some obvious things that could be changed. But, you know, we saw the other day where the government talked about changing superannuation, increasing the tax on superannuation. What was it, for balances over $3 million or something? And the pushback against that, I couldn't believe it. I think it affected, what was it, 20,000 Australians. And the argument was, well, in 50 years' time, that could be me. So I have a huge respect for poor governments that try to push through obvious and sensible reforms. They will get a backlash from people that say, my dad worked all his life and he happened to make $100 million, and why shouldn't the government now pay for it? And the government is the current workers. When I left school, there were 7 of us supporting one retiree. In a few years' time, there's going to be less than 3 workers supporting one retiree. So, you know, the government is those 3 workers.
I agree. Look, I know we're both passionate about this topic, but I mean, this isn't something which we decided to talk about today, the funding model. I know change of governments, etc., but unpopular opinion. But do you believe that in terms of a solution would be potentially increasing the high rate taxpayers by 1.25% and apportioning 0.25% towards aged care? Or is that just a band-aid solution? What are your thoughts on, if you had a blank canvas now, what would you do and why?
Yeah, that's one of the solutions. You know, we finish up, there are other things that people with chronic heart disease, should we have a 1% to look after? So I'm sort of a little bit reticent on putting additional caps on. I don't see a problem with a small retention from the RADs to go towards refurbishing and saying it can only be used to refurbish. Yeah, so in the asset management for facilities, and of course the new norm is going to be residential care delivered through retirement villages and land lease communities. It's got to be, because there's just not enough investment going into RACs at the moment. So, and listening at the conference we were both at just recently, the Leaders Summit, the lawyers standing up and say, careful what you ask for. If you offer care and you don't deliver care, you could be. So once again, we're opening up another can of worms, but that has got to be addressed going forward, that more and more care, and ELDK model, what a brilliant model. And Anglicare have recognised that. They've taken a 50% equity in it and looking at rolling it out across their entire division. So I think that is a very forward-looking way of doing things, where you are going to get care delivered into your retirement village.
So Robert, this is a common scenario that's come across your desk, I believe, multiple times in your career. A couple living together, one of them has been approved for aged care, they've got their ACAT. They live in an asset worth 1.2 million, however it's the primary place of residence. They like to go to a nice aged care facility where the RAD is $1 million. What's the pathway to entry, if you could explain that to our viewers?
Basically, they've got to have 2 lots of 190,000 to get in the bank on the day of entry. So if the family can lend that money to them, and it literally only needs to be in there on the day. So a week before, take it out a week later. Can you rake up that money to have it in their account on the day that the wife goes in? If it's not, and she's assessed as low means or now concessional resident, she will always be low means concessional resident. Quite often the facility that she's looking at won't accept low means residents. The other option, of course, is for them both to go in on the same day. Then there's no protected person living in the house, so the house counts for both. But if the family can't come up with it, then what we would ask, we'd then lean on the facility manager to say, can you extend the respite for a couple more weeks, please, while we would organise a drawdown, an equity withdrawal from the home to have it in their account on the day that they become permanent resident. So that's the solution.
So definitely a scenario you're well versed in. What are your thoughts on concessional residents looking to be in a facility that has additional services? How would that work and look like?
Well, if it's extra services, they won't be offered a bed because there's no accommodation supplement paid to extra services room. No accommodation supplement is paid. So effectively zero RAD or DAP or DAC or whatever you like. So normally an extra service facility won't accept a low means resident. Additional services, absolutely, there's no problem. So you can have a service, and a lot of the facilities, I understand now, the Commissioner is not giving any extra service licences as far as I'm aware. I think that's been, so it's almost grandfathering for extra services. But additional services, more and more facilities are looking to introduce additional services. And it's once again a minefield because the bureaucracy is pushing back against why that should be provided for nothing, you know. So providing it's in excess of the quality of care principles, we can put a fee on it. One of the other restrictions, of course, if you have used, for instance, Foxtel in the room, if you've used that to approach the pricing commissioner to get your room price above $550,000, you then can't use it as an additional services. You can't use it twice. Once again, it's these silly hurdles being pushed up to stop the facility being viable, and market forces, if they overdo it, they're not going to get any applications. So why don't they leave it up to the provider to set the rules and well, not the rules, but certainly care rules need to be strictly supervised, nothing against that. But the financial modelling has to be loosened up so that facilities can make a profit. And it's not a dirty word. We were talking earlier about Ramsay Healthcare. People don't expect Ramsay Healthcare. If you go into a Ramsay private hospital, you know they're going to make a profit. So why shouldn't somebody providing over and above, excuse me, over and above the minimum requirements be able to charge for it? And if people want to come into that facility and are prepared to pay for that facility, and they happen to make a profit along the way, yippee.
I sort of think, it's more than that, Robert, in the respect that the industry seems to be tarnished with this perception from the public that we're taking from people, taking away from their livelihood, or, these organisations shouldn't be generating a profit. But nobody gets into business to say, hey, by 2 years, let's break even, and year 3, let's go into liquidation. So I think, what are your thoughts on the mentality in terms of the perception of the public with aged care? Because ideally we want providers to be profitable. We want them to be able to, in 10 years' time, look at an asset and upgrade the furnishings and the fixtures to have that good feeling environment for their residents. And we've seen now, like the smaller providers, in the last 18 months, it's been quite concerning to say the least. The smaller providers with sort of 5 aged care facilities or less in their portfolio are shutting up shop. They can't keep the lights on. There was a provider in Metro Sydney that felt they could not meet the 200 minutes of care by RNs and decided to, close the doors. What are your thoughts?
And there's also the wealthy people. My dad, just because he did well, he's now got to pay for things. We shouldn't have done as well. If he got here with nothing, he would have been better off. There's no logic. You can't argue with that logic. It's just crazy.
Which leads us to the next point in terms of addressing the elephant in the room, the star rating that's been brought about. Allocating a star rating to an aged care facility based on compliance, care, etc. It's been dubbed the TripAdvisor of aged care. What are your thoughts?
I went to boarding school when I was 6, and we had star charts for when we were very good boys. And I put it in that category. I think it is just almost insulting to me. I think it's an awful star rating. And it's, enough said. But people, certainly, if they want to go on LinkedIn and make comments about the quality of care or something, that's fine. That's adults. But star rating to me is what you do in primary school.
No, very well said. I think it's a bit concerning that homes could be negatively impacted with the star ratings based upon experiences that potentially could be taken out of context. And I guess, in terms of impressions and expectations, it leads us to occupancy. And the topic and sort of question I wanted to ask you, Robert, is what are your thoughts on rural providers, sort of 40-bedded home that only have 26 residents in the home in terms of financial sustainability?
That is always going to be a problem. And for people that have lived in Boorlegal all their life, so they don't want to go outside Hay's only, 60 kilometres or 80 kilometres on one tree plane to get there, but it's a hell of a long way from home. So those facilities really need some additional subsidy. But quite often there would be, let's talk Boorlegal. I'm using that as an example, the famous saying here, one of the hottest places on earth, hell, hay and Boorlegal. But there would be graziers there that would be incredibly wealthy men and more than happy to pay twice the price because they've had a shearer that's been working for them for 30 years that also needs care, and they'd happily share the load and put a bit more in simply to keep the local community will support it. And we're watching, Shire and local council, one after the other, walking away from aged care. They just can't do it. It's too hard. And they're just not financially viable. So if the local community were prepared to put more into it and the wealthy residents to co-contribute or contribute more, they would become viable.
So, very good point. I think, do you think if we continue with this current funding model in aged care, do you think in terms of the next 5 years, from a market share perspective, there'll be 70% retirement living communities and 30% aged care? Well, I guess what's left?
Exactly. And it's happened in England, in the UK. That's right. Residential aged care in a downward spiral unless the funding changes, and the next generation will be looked after in retirement villages. So retirement village operators, I see a huge opportunity for them to expand and keep going, whereas aged care facilities, but within the confine. Once again, I come back. I think the LDK model is just superb. What they're doing. I come back, and I think that is the future of the industry, regardless.
I agree. They've almost, left a blueprint for the industry to imitate and to follow. Now, in terms of your thoughts, the Royal Commission have given multiple recommendations, and one of them, I guess, is the model of care and how we look after our vulnerable and ageing population. But the question I wanted to ask you is specific to NDIS participants. Now, we've seen, recently NDIS participants falling into aged care where it's probably not the most appropriate place for them to be. We've seen some fantastic providers recently who have household models with participants with younger onset of dementia and they're really living thorough, happy, fulfilled lives. What are your thoughts on the household model for NDIS participants and the financial viability on rolling this out?
Very expensive, so it's there for the wealthy. Realistically, the household model, and there is one in Sydney that not mentioning any names, but it's caters to somebody that has substantial assets. That household model is just not viable to try and run a household model with that level of nursing without serious funding. So either the government's got to come in and fund it, and that ain't going to happen realistically, and you couldn't expect it to happen. So the household model, yes, it's there. It's a wonderful model. Works, group homes works superbly, but you can't go into the group home unless you've got substantial assets.
Good insights there, Robert. So I think in terms of, a bit of quick maths now, what's the cost analysis in the respect of a resident in a residential aged care facility with a RAD of 500,000 plus, all the other additional costs versus someone in a group home, a household model?
Yeah, it runs into hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to live in a group home.
Okay, so it's pretty substantial without stating the obvious. There's sort of clear daylight between both of them. Very much
so. But for those that can afford it, and the level of care that is provided, and the activities that are provided, the flexibility that's provided, they do a wonderful job. An absolute wonderful job. But yes, that's definitely a user pay model, because the only government funding coming in there is the home care package.
And Robert, what are your thoughts? With it's pretty sad to see NDIS participants who shouldn't be in aged care being in aged care. But what are your thoughts when they are admitted into an aged care facility, in terms of the best pathways for them and what should happen for them to live fulfilling lives?
Well, NDIS patients that are in aged care tend to be there for historical purposes. More and more aged care providers are now saying, I don't want to be NDIS approved, so they won't accept them. Younger people that need that high level of care really needs to be done ideally outside. It's not good for the 30-year-old male or female that's in with 85-year-olds with 80% cognitive impairment. So not good for either cohort. So really the government needs to set up group home type arrangements, and for people with no assets, yes, society's happy to support them. They wouldn't get a lot of pushback, I don't think, from people in general for spending a substantial amount of having high need NDIS younger residents in a group home.
Good points there, Robert. I think it's great that finally Fair Work have increased the wages for care staff, registered nurses, which has also coincided with a minimum wage increase, which has confused certain providers, but it's much needed. But what are your thoughts in terms of increased regulation with the 200 minutes of care per day, ANACC and sort of CPI not being factored in? So in terms of what are your thoughts from a provider's perspective?
It's driving more red ink. It's as simple as that. It's the level of and I'm a little bit with this 200 minutes of care. I would challenge anybody outside the industry doing any job. How many minutes do you spend actively working for your employer in an 8-hour day? And if I asked you to actually monitor it, time and motion study yourself, you wouldn't have time to do anything else. I had I'm talking to aged care RNs and particularly facility managers. They're spending 70-80% of their day in their office ticking boxes, complying, rather than being out talking to families and residents, which is their passion. So this regulation of 200 minutes of care with a star rating system, you know, we're almost back to kindergarten of the air. And in my day, I'm sorry, if care's not being provided, take it in an overall sense, and sanctions. I'm not against, you know, if people are doing the wrong thing, but trying to get that level of spreadsheets ticking. 200 minutes of care. Oh my goodness.
You know, despite us being in the human services industry, it almost seems like, you know, the 200 minutes of care per day, we've taken on this professional services sort of mentality with billable hours, and to document and verify what we've done. I just think it's important that we sort of cut down on the administrative burden and allow our staff more time to care for our residents.
So it's basically people working 8 hours, divide that into minutes, allowing an hour for lunch and 20 minutes for morning tea, and you've got 15 of those, so you spread that across and you've got 30 residents, so have you got enough staff? Yeah. I'm sorry, I just find it, the bureaucracy just being ridiculous in the level of compliance and the minute level of compliance.
That's great, Robert. I think we'll wrap it up there. I know you're a busy individual, so really thank you for your time and the knowledge and insights that you've imparted on the viewers today. You've been part of the industry a long time, and this thought-provoking episode has been most appreciated. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in. We really want to continue these thought-provoking conversations with industry leaders like yourself. And if you like what you've seen, then hit the like and subscribe button so we can continue to talk to the industry and shine a light on the great things that we're doing in the sector.